my introduction to art was probably from I was 5 years old in Jamaica. The Jamaica Institute is a place, a repository of art. And in those days, nobody said contemporary art. It was art of Jamaicans and Caribbean artists. And so the work was very literal, expressionist, but we didn't have the titles. I mean, I look back now at somebody like a David Boxer, who is an abstractionist now, but in those days, art was a language of beauty. And the Jamaica Institute had a program on Saturdays along with the library, Jamaica Library. And my mom would take us to the Jamaica Institute, and storytelling, reading and storytelling was the basis of my introduction to art. The Institute and the library was surrounded with objects on the wall. So you couldn't ignore them. I couldn't tell you at 5 and 6 who the artists were, but I grew up with a language, a literal, intimate language of art. And that happened from a very early age. Music, dance, poetry. In the Caribbean, we talk about pantomime. This is an art form that I don't hear talked about here in the States as much as in England, where there is no language, people mime out experiences. And so I grew up with pantomime as a part of my cultural upbringing. Oh, don't let me take all day. I am the daughter, the last of 3 daughters of a woman, Eglantine Melita Buchanan from Hanover, Jamaica, and a very debonair, charismatic dad, Rupert Carlton Gordon. My mother was a teacher and a former Jamaica scholar. She is from the rural parts of Jamaica, and a real feisty Renaissance woman. And my dad was charismatic and a military man, and did accounting and worked with the University of the West Indies. He was one of the bursars at the University of the West Indies, where, you know, we had an intimate relationship with the campus in Taylor Hall. So, my mother was a disciplinarian. I think as the last of the 3 girls, I got away with a little bit of murder, in that I was able to see my sisters make the mistakes and perhaps try not to make them as well. I loved her dearly. She lived with us in Miami for over 20 years. And in our home with my husband, Roy, and I, and our son, Gordon. And she's affectionately called by my artist friends and family, Mama G. My dad died early, so he did not have the experience with me in Miami. I moved to Miami as an adult in 1979 to come to work with infectious diseases with a Dr. Thomas Hoffman. My background is medical microbiology. And so Professor Hoffman was one of my mentors, and I moved here to work with him at the Rosenstiel Medical Science Building downtown where Jackson Memorial is. And we were working at the time on gonorrhea and syphilis, creating a vaccine for infectious diseases, and in particular, gonorrhea and syphilis. And I came from the medical microbiology department at the University of the West Indies to work with him here. And that was my beginning. And I lived right across from the VA in a little place called Creek Club Apartments, and where they put the medical students up and what they call research faculty up. And that was my humble beginnings in Miami. So I didn't have the usual, tales that people have. I have enough knowledge to be absolutely terrified, and too little knowledge to offer a solution, which is a really terrible place to be in. I have spoken to my friends in Jamaica who are still, some of them are still practicing virologists. My former professor, Kay Moody, who is in New York, about why is it that this particular virus has been handled so differently. And it's not the fear of death. Ebola killed a whole bunch of folk and didn't get the same response. I don't have an answer. What I do know is that we have enough evidence of people dying for us to know that this is real. And that if you're over 60, you should have a healthy respect for the disease. It is a pandemic. It's not a new term. We've had pandemics before. As a young microbiologist, we feared leprosy, and we had organisms in our lab that we were fearful of, because we knew that if you got ill, chances are you were going to die. I have not in my lifetime, though, seen this global response to a virus that can be replicated in a laboratory that the medical community has a handle on. And I don't have an understanding for it. I'm very respectful about the research, and I really wish that our scholars and our infectious disease doctors and researchers would be allowed the money and the space to give time to it. The interesting thing is, I always laugh about people who have PhDs and these attachments. When you ask them what their name is and they say, I'm Dr. So-and-so, you know, we become who we are because of a society, right? But you're born something else most of the times. I am an artist. I have not had the audacity as a teenager. I did not have the audacity as a teenager to have a conversation with middle class parents that I wanted to become an artist. In my time, it was first of all a conversation that would have gone nowhere. And I would have been seen as somebody who didn't have any ambition. Ambition is a word in a Jamaican family that is front and center with who you become. But it didn't negate the fact that I'm an artist. I write, I do poetry secretly. I conjure and dream and think of things in my head. I love beauty. I see beauty in almost everything. A leaf, you know, the breeze, the ocean. So that's really who I am. Not being afforded the opportunity to go to art school did not stop me from lingering in art school. You know, when I was at the university, my friends were artists. Many of them had a different conversation with their parents and went to the Edna Manley School of the Performing Arts and Visual Arts. And I would hang out there on weekends and learn to tie-dye and go to the dances and stuff. So when I talk to young people now, I always ask them, if there were no hindrances, what happens here? What is happening in your heart? Who would you become if there was no one watching? And that's when you get the real answers. So for me, timing was important. Timing was important to making a decision, but it wasn't a conscious decision. It was a lived decision, seeking an opportunity to be birthed. So while I worked at Jackson Rosenstein Medical Science Building, which is now UM's medical campus, with Dr. Hoffman, I became a pharmaceutical rep. And for 19 years, I did research and sales for Searle Pharmaceuticals. Searle Pharmaceuticals was a small company from out of Chicago that did big research. They were heavily research-based in cardiovascular, women's health, female health. They had one of the first, I was going to say abortion, but I didn't mean that. Birth control pill, Demelin 135, and also in allergies and so yeah, so I worked with them for 19 years until 1999. And while I was working with them, I've always done work in the community. And I have a son, as I explained to you. Gordon's friends were now coming back from college, and many of them had gone to art school. I'd volunteered at DASH, Design and Architecture Art School, and right here in the Design District, close to where we live. And many of the artists were coming back from New World and DASH and Michael Kropp to Miami from really prestigious schools, Pratt Institute, RISD, coming back with this really mature contemporary language to a Miami in 1996 that was still trying to define itself as a space. I remember Barbara Gilman. You remember Barbara Gilman's gallery in the Design District? She was, I have lots of affection for her. Her gallery was one of the places that opened her doors to me really early. And they were complaining. I'm talking about Caribbean kids and young people. And they were complaining that they would follow what they thought was the proper thing to do, take a portfolio to a gallery. And many times after having had an appointment with the galleries, they would get there and there was no interest in the work. The galleries barely opened the pages. And I was just hearing these stories every time I saw them in when we were going from gallery to gallery. So I said, why don't we do something for ourselves? What are you waiting to? You have this knowledge, you need to create. And it started in our living room in Morningside. We started with 5 artists coming, bringing work in progress. Many of them were doing really contemporary stuff, installation work. Taking a dot and superimposing it and adding things and using leaves, ephemeral stuff that was not work, that was object work, right, that you could put on a wall. It wasn't a painting that you could put on a wall and sell. They could all paint, they could all draw, but that was not where the work was. And so that is how we started, humbly. It wasn't a conscious, I'm going to get up and start a gallery. It was, let's create a space so that you can continue to create your work. And in 1996, we did the first exhibition. I had a studio at the Bakehouse Art Complex, which is thriving today. But in those rundown, there was no air conditioning. We had to make do, but there were studio spaces in Wynwood that we could use.